I know you must be just alarmed at my outfit. Don't you like it? Well, you know, we are in this part of the world, cosmopolitan, we say, many nations. And so I can't neglect to identify with the Chinese that are part of our own populace. And so I'm glad to wear such adornment. Well, we continue here today with the loss and grief. I trust that during the week you had some reflections and you were helped in terms of how you may have been handling your own loss and learning how to grieve with much more ease. Notice I'm not saying we are not going to grieve. I've just helped you how to put perspective to this grieving. This week I want to continue a little bit on the topic, but I want to look at it from a cultural perspective. And you're wondering why, how? Because most times it is just what we are expected to do. And that is cultural. So that you hear that somebody has died, or you hear you lose a job, or your house burned down, and people say, gosh, hey, and I know it is. They may not really know, but it's a cliche. I know it is. And they expect you to be crying, and you be careful with and how we're going. So that culturally, there is an expectation out there of how to handle this word, loss and grief. Now, handling the loss from a cultural perspective, again, there's some cultures around the world that establishes loss as we go along. There's something called the rites of passage in several countries, which is a loss and a gain. So I'm going to lose something to gain something. And in some cases, the loss is very traumatic because we have in some African countries where there's mutilation in terms of cutting one's face, blood, women, their genitals are being manipulated there. And so we have all these interpretations of what loss is. So it's important for us to see that it's not just a personal thing. It comes out of a whole cultural and national concept. So when there's an expectation that I am going to lose an arm, or my face is going to have some cuts on it, I can't do anything. So I'm growing up waiting for this loss. Lots of friends, lots of time, and so that has its own culture. So we need to see from a lot of these other countries, there are a lot of national expectations, national icons, national situations that brings us into. Even for Jews with Bar Mitzvah, when you reach that particular age of 12, 13, there's going to be a loss of your childhood into immediate youth to become man. So that the things that you would have done then, you have to lose that to establish now. And so culturally, how do we define? When we are in a place of education, we see ourselves going from kindergarten into primary, into secondary or high school. There are a lot of communities. I lose the friendships I had here. I come into this, I grow for 5 years or 7 years, and I have a loss of friendships. And I go to somewhere else, so I keep losing friendships. And all that is cultural. And you were saying, Dr. Niles, what meaning is this? Sit down for a while and go back in your minds and see the kinds of that you would have had, maybe I should say behaviors, in those transitions from one stage in terms of education, from primary, let's just say primary to secondary to tertiary. The environment. I started off in a small little room or a house with a few people. Then I went to a bigger school with more people, with more classrooms. I lost the intimacy of smallness. And when I go into secondary school, it gets even bigger, with fields and bathrooms and wow. And I get to university and I can't even find a faculty because it's so far. And yet servers try to maintain that individualism and that privacy and that solace and that become isolated, still wanting to grow up into that little frame, especially if you have come from a household where there was only you, one child, or maybe two, and the house was small. As you gravitate into the bigness of life, wow, can I handle that? So I would have want to regain that lostness by adapting lifestyles to fit back into where I've come from. And those are real issues of how people are living lives in their past, even in their present, because they don't want to lose, or they don't want us to recognize that they've moved away, and life is bringing not just new directions, but a whole new global concept, a new space. This thing is rather interesting, so that grieving becomes insidious. You're always grieving. You're always wondering how it can be. And I've seen some of this with marital issues and marital couples. That's not English, is it? Couples who are married, spouses. I've seen that. I used to be in a small house, and you build a big house for your spouse, or you buy a big house, and it's like, wow, all these rooms. I've heard people say, wow, you're in a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom house. They grew up in a 1-bedroom. All the siblings. Now I'm lost. Where is that closeness? Where is that intimacy? I and my spouse alone in this big house. We just need one room. I get paid. I used to get a few dollars. We grew up with a few dollars. Now I have money. I don't know how to spend it. So I never have money. Because why? I'm accustomed to having a little bit. So the little bit is money. The big money is not money. And these are psychological issues that we have to work out in terms of how cultures demand our own attention, but yet we lose to integrate with that consciousness and bring newness to where we are going. So I want to help us today as we continue. How have I lived, and how will I be living in the next 10, 20 years, where there's yet so much change ahead of me? We're living in a global space of technology, and there's so much loss there. I was sharing last night that my father asked me sometime years ago, Kenneth, do anybody write letters? That was a loss for him. It also was a loss of the use of his skill, handwriting. He wrote impeccably, but there was no need to write because nobody was writing him. And if he did write a letter, it was not being returned. I explained to him that there's now a global market of technology with laptops and phones where you can send messages without writing. So if you don't have technology, what's happening? But there's a loss of skill. There's a loss of art because people are not drawing with pens anymore. You go on especially architects, you put up an app and you put whatever it is, and the house comes up, the properties comes up, and the designs are there. So that we are losing skills. We are losing the adaptabilities of how we exchange it, even conversation. We don't talk to people in English and through with our mouths anymore. We talk out of texting. We have lost, and we are losing the capacity for our language sets, our language skills. I do not know if you realize how this thing is so much and where the grief comes in, because when we are faced with not being able to adapt to these changes, we feel affected by using words like rejection, don't care. It's not that sometimes you're rejected or care. For instance, spouses, you haven't called me. You haven't called me. The whole day gone. And what? We haven't called you. I was accustomed calling you. I didn't have a phone where I was. I didn't grow up with a phone. Now there's something called self. I have to adapt to the context of self unless I lose my spouse. So we are in a place of urgency now, trying to work out how to fit it, how not to fit, and how to make it work. Because if I don't call, so I have to learn how to use cell phone, I have to learn how to use WhatsApp, I have to learn how to use Gmail, I have to learn how to use Google. Wow! So I would not fall into that context. But I'm grieving. So grief comes in there. Because I feel sad. I feel disappointed. I feel I am disappointed. I feel guilty because I cannot keep up with. So that there is that inert sadness of what's happening with me because I can't understand the cultural context of loss. So that we need to pause and look back and say, how am I phasing through the day? Phasing. That's a word where we learn how to, or fast enough, some people say, how we learn how to take a context and bring it into meaning day by day. How do I do that? How do I get up a morning all of a sudden and not have to light a stove and recognize I may have to use my coal pot? Or maybe the microwave, sorry. Oh, how do I know that I can't use my fridge anymore and I have to get a box and put things in it? Wow, how do I work that? Am I able to work that? Am I able to establish that? How do I establish that? So there's a loss here, but there's also a loss somewhere else in terms of how do I mesh me to gain me? Is it possible for us just to pause here again? I like to use that word pause, and to reflect. Lifestyles, dress. I used to dress a particular way. I can't dress that way anymore. Because why? There are no dresses sold in that category anymore. There's no, everything is short, everything is whole. Now, the length of skirts are gone up. So that I have so many situations where I cannot work and I cannot comprehend in terms of what is being done and how it is being done. I want us to be very mindful of where we are going and how we are doing it. I mentioned handwriting. I mentioned literacy. Did you see that? Because how am I learning to really articulate clearly if every time I write there's an auto-refill, there's an auto-correct? I'm not going back to a dictionary to find when it can be corrected by itself. I want us to realize that if I look at how am I affecting my learning? When I do not get the particular result in an exam, is it because I haven't learned? Or if I have not been able to assimilate the new learning, so I reject the new and uphold the old. So when I get to the exam, I don't know how to do the new because I'm still captured in the old. It's important to realize those kinds of changes. It's important to understand that I have to change. It's important to understand that I am going to change. What would 2024, what would 2050 mean to me? How am I working those things so that we can adapt to change? My issue here today is the loss, yes, but I need to take time to talk about the grief. I fuss, I fret, I fuss, I fret, I fuss. That's grieving. Let me go again. I stress much. I stretch more. Stress, that's part of grieving. Because my stressing and my fretting has to do with me accommodating or not accommodating the new experiences that we have called change. Which means I've lost something to gain a new thing. How do I work that? And I say cultural because that's real. I say traditional because that's a constant moving daily from one to the other to establish the upkeep of my today. Because I have to learn how to keep up with the Joneses, is a phrase. I have to learn how to keep relevant with the times. I really do. I really do. So it is important for how I am working out daily what needs to be done. So how do I grieve less? That means how do I fret less? How do I agonize less? It's important for me to appreciate that I have to keep learning to work out. There is this phrase or clause in the Bible that says, morning by morning, new mercies I see. But we don't realize that we have to lose yesterday's mercy to identify with today's mercy. And a lot of us cannot lose yesterday's mercy because we are trapped in evil generational mercies, blessings that we don't want to lose. This is how we did it. This is how I do it. I'm hoping you could fill in the gaps for me, and I think we could come back to some of what I'm saying and elaborate as we go along. Foods. You ever hear a newly married couple quarrel that this is not how it should taste? Why? Because it doesn't taste like how mother or parents did it, and he's saying the same thing. Do you realize that spouses are arguing because of what? The loss of taste, the loss of identity of the past. It also makes them realize that, hey, you are in a new phase of life. Because the taste is different. The bed is different. The feel, the furniture. I used to be very comfortable. I can't find a chair to make me comfortable the way I used to. So we're always arguing within our own selves about trying to find relevance for today. But we have to do that successfully if we lose tomorrow. We have to appreciate that it's a new day. What today brings is different to what yesterday brought and what tomorrow will bring. So therefore, we have to learn how to grieve less insidiously and learn how to adapt so that we can have more joy in our lives. We are struggling daily with that thing called joy. We're struggling daily with that thing called happiness because we are still holding on to past in order for us to reflect today and far less more the future. How are we going to find there? How are we going to establish that? We have to learn that today is today, and I need to learn to understand that I have lost yesterday. I've lost last year. And when we come to that now, I can bring in those issues of death of a person and realize that, excuse me, if X has died, that was past tense. Oh, Dr. Niles, you're being heartless. Dr. Niles, you don't know, I miss my daddy, my mommy, my auntie, etc. But that was yesterday. I'm not saying they haven't died. I'm not saying that you're not going to have reflections. But how do you handle the emotion to continue living today victoriously? And we want to have memorials that keeps reminds us of the past. So we have all these services and dinners and expressions of the dead, wanting to remember and to keep up with the dead, and if they were here and I missed them, and we keep going back. And so therefore, grieving is continuous, and grieving continues to impact negatively, and we can't seem to fit into what is necessary for us today. Tell me, how are we going forward? Tell me, do we want to go forward? I know one thing. We are losing today just now. The day that you are in there, looking at me, that day is going to filter, and just now there's going to be a night, and just now there's going to be a next morning. How are we interpreting this? How are we readying ourselves to identify that we have lost yesterday, we are living today, and we are establishing tomorrow? It's important for us to work this out. So it's not just, again, let me reiterate, it's not just about the death of a person, but whether it's a death of a horse, a fish, whatever, we are learning how to realize change. Because every time there's a death, there's a loss. I look around sometimes and I see dry leaves because they died and they fell. You understand that? It's dead. So I want us to see, it's important for us to see that when we plant something, it dies on one spot to live in another. It's called replanting. But it's a loss. Oh, when I pick my mango, it loses itself from the tree. I now have it, and then it loses all completely because I just ate it. We have to realize that we are in a constant cycle of grief and loss and grief because of how we live. It's about going from one day to the next. So if I'm blessed, that means I'm blessed daily, not from yesterday, but from today. Can I lose yesterday and adapt today? We have to work on that. And so I want to continue on our next progress talking about resilience. How do we become more resilient and adaptable to our present so that we will not be affected so much by our past? So Dr. Niles signing off here. Another good day to you, and remember what you experienced yesterday. Don't carry it into today. Today has its new mercies that the Lord wants you to have so that you can be happy and joyous and to be an overcomer. Have a good week.